Hello and welcome to Making Waves with me, Rowan Henthorne.
And me, Aaron Ibanez. So in this series we will be exploring all things ocean.
And talking to the movers and shakers, the ocean explorers and the characters that are driven to make a difference in this watery world.
So drop in and join us for this 6-part series of stories from the sea. Was that too friendly? Do I need to be more serious?
No, I like the friendliness. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Making Waves.
And in this episode, it's all about our connections with the sea and nature.
I think we all need to connect a little bit more to our natural environment, and there's many ways to do that. There's many ways to connect, and our guest today, Erland Cooper, is testament to that because he's a musician who connects with the natural world through his music.
Yeah, so Erland's from the Orkney Islands, and I guess to the people listening on the Isle of Man, it'll be really interesting to hear about how he's inspired by nature and, you know, how he uses the sea as a muse. And like any good scientist, you've been busy in the field this week. What have you been up to?
I actually licked a jellyfish today. Do you want to see a video of me licking a jellyfish?
So bizarre.
I had no intention to do it, but I lost a game of odds on with my brother.
It's almost like desert island behaviour, that.
Giant jellyfish on the beach. It was huge. And then I licked it, and I spent the next 20 minutes trying to figure out whether I was imagining that my tongue was starting to tingle and feel really weird, or whether it was. And I was like, can you imagine going to the hospital with this giant tongue and then be like, what's your profession? And you're like, oh, I'm a marine scientist. They'd be like, well, why were you licking jellyfish?
And what would your reason be? Would it literally be, for a bet?
For a bet,
Well, that wasn't very scientific, was it?
Well, but I have actually also been doing important stuff for the podcast. I've been researching.
Good. What have you learned?
I learnt something really interesting about whales, actually. A single whale, like a big whale, stores as much carbon within it as up to 1,000 trees.
Wow. To me, that's an amazing way to sort of measure nature's value. What a wonderful currency to measure something in trees.
Yeah. And when you think there's so many human-based solutions that we talk about, and they're really important, but actually making sure that our natural ecosystems are functioning at their best is incredibly important. Most great whale species are down at least to 1/3 of what their numbers were before we historically hunted and overfished them and pretty much decimated their populations. I think blue whale populations are 2% of what they once were. Mm-hmm. And when you think of each whale is worth 1,000 trees, that's some serious carbon storing potential there in our oceans. And that's just one, subgroup of species. That's just, great whales. Basking sharks probably do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that's really exciting, and it makes us feel, it gives you that sense of connection. It makes you feel like it's not just us trying to do it on our own. It's about realising that humans are part of the natural ecosystem, and the natural world has mechanisms to help regulate climate and regulate the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And because we've become slightly disconnected and disillusioned with the natural world over the last few hundred years, we stopped realising that nature will do a huge amount of this for us. And I think that the idea of that whale is perfect, the most beautiful way of thinking about it.
It's almost poetic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing.
In keeping with our interviewee, and I guess in keeping with the theme of today's episode, you've got some sounds of the ocean for us.
Yeah, I thought that was a fun topic to explore and research. So first one, keeping with the whale theme, southern right whales actually whisper to each other. They whisper.
And what's sort of the purpose of the delicate ear chatter?
Yeah, so we know that obviously whales can make this really beautiful, loud song that can almost travel the distance of oceans, but scientists have just realised that they actually whisper to each other because the mothers and their calves need to stay protected, and part of that is being really quiet. So they go into the coastal area where waves are crashing on the surface, and they go really close to the surface, and they can talk really quietly and evade any predators. So it's super cool. Do you want to listen to it?
Absolutely. It's really interesting that you say that they know they need to be super quiet. It's like such a self-aware thing because they're obviously some of the biggest creatures on the planet, aren't they?
Sentient beings.
We've got some whale whispers.
Super cute, isn't it?
More grunting than whispers there, but
kind of sounds a bit like my stomach when I haven't eaten. But yeah, so I thought that was really cool. And then from the very big to the very small. So a lot of species that live on coral reefs spend a certain amount of their lifetime floating in the open ocean in like a planktonic phase. And that can be like crustaceans and fish and all sorts of animals. And for a long time, scientists didn't know how they found their way back to their home reef, because reefs are different, and certain reefs are better for certain species. And now they've worked out that they actually remember the sound of their home reef, and they will travel back to that sound.
So they're completely comforted by where they were sort of born, and that's where they go to hang out again. And
yeah, I guess we're putting about human emotion, saying they're comforted, but they're definitely connected to that environment, and that's where they head back to, which is really amazing. Yeah, have a listen. This is the sound of a reef in the river.
sounds like bacon sizzling or something like that.
I was going to say it sounds a bit like a rainforest.
Yeah, that's interesting how it kind of like the two sort of sounds, mimic each other on land and in sea. That there's so many similarities there.
And it's really interesting, like when you dive on a reef a lot, you really notice like how it sounds and feels a lot different. And like dawn and dusk, it is like, it's like being in a city when everyone's waking up and going to work, or when everyone's kind of like simmering down for the day. You really would feel that kind of feeling when you're on the reef. Obviously, like in an amazing watery, reefy world, not in a city, but you kind of get what I mean.
But this is important, isn't it? I think I have read about this. It's called acoustic enrichment, and it's all to do with basically restoring depleted reefs. Yeah,
so scientists now know that to help reefs regenerate quicker, they can play the sound of a healthy reef, and it will get more species to come to it and start rebuilding it quicker. So it just shows you how important it is, and obviously they have threats from ocean noise and that sort of thing. But
genius. And I guess to go from the sort of textures of the reef, because there was all sorts going on in that sound clip. We've got one more, which it's okay for the podcast, I suppose, but we're gonna have to sort of direct you to the footage, because the footage does it justice, really. Much better,
yeah. It's a video of a seal clapping for the first time. It's been recorded clapping, and this particular scientist knew they'd been doing it for years but never managed to get it on film, and he managed to get it on film, and it's that's it, clapping. It sounds a lot like a computer.
A slight error message on the computer. Ignore that. We'll hear some clapping grey seals.
It's pretty loud, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Underwater, I imagine it's quite hard to make that sound.
Yeah, and they do it to scare off.
It's like a display of territory, I imagine, or is it sort of
a bit of bravado?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm the big man.
Yeah, look at me.
I can clap really loud.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you have ever tried to clap underwater, it's really hard, isn't it?
It's incredibly hard. Yeah, so those were my sound bites.
And I guess it's a perfect time now to play our conversation with Erland Cooper, Orkney musician and composer. I'm delighted that he's on our podcast, because he's such a lovely guy, so humble, so softly spoken, and his music's really, really interesting. It's very moving, and I hope this conversation just acts as that space for you as the listener to kind of just reflect on your relationship with nature, because Erland's soundtrack certainly does that. So
perfect, let's give it a listen.
I was talking to my dad this morning, and we were talking about feathers. He said, I've got a gannet's feather. Oh, I used to have a whole bunch of gannet's feathers. I was like, really? He said, I found a dead gannet. And he was a teacher. So he picked up the gannet, took it home, chopped its wings off, and as a biology teacher, he hung them up so you could see, firstly, this incredible wingspan of this incredible seabird. Secondly, its feathers, and thirdly, you could see its bone structure. And he kept them, kept it preserved. I must have been, like 8 or something? It must have been in my brain as just there, and quite kind of morbid, obviously. He must have chopped them off with a pair of pliers or something. Obviously, the bird was found on the seashore. Who knows how or why it died, but it was a lovely way to teach children, right, about flight.
I'm interested in the aspect from an islander to an islander point of view, and obviously your soundtracks, Solan Goose, So Scary, they're entrenched in this sense of place, and I wonder, when you're sort of opening this up to people, and you always posit the opening of a show of trying to gently take people across to the Orkney Islands on a ferry. I mean, do you get homesick? I mean, is that sort of part of this sort of process of bringing people to Orkney? Is this sort of harnessing your own and channeling your own homesickness for Orkney?
Do you know, that's a good question. I mean, firstly, you caught me at a point of reflection, which I think is quite good, because we met during the hedonism of the process, and now here we are at the end, before I move on to the next thing. And it's good to reflect on things, isn't it, and try and unpick, because you don't know whilst you're doing it. You don't have to fully think about it. But what I realised at the very last show, and I said it out loud to an audience in Newcastle, I said, thank you for having us and for going on this journey to Orkney. Orkney is, like many islands, a place of rich community, and it's the people that work together on the island that make it so self-sufficient. But Orkney can be anything you want it to be. And I think that's what I was trying to say. That's all I'm trying to do in this music. Whether you go to Orkney or not, whether you go to that place in your head, doesn't really matter, or whether you go there physically on a boat. I think it's about escaping or being transported to another place. That could be the Isle of Man. That could be the Scilly Isles. That could be anywhere. It could be, the Norfolk coast. What I realise I'm doing for me is it's my Orkney at that time. I'm evoking memories, childhood memories, good and bad. But I think what I'm doing is, I don't think it's homesickness. I think it's a feeling of trying to be transported to a place for as long as I want to be, that brings up all those feelings of childhood memory. Perhaps a moment of innocence, perhaps a moment of where you didn't quite think as much.
You talk about the spirit of the people and the self-sufficiency of the community. But of course, a big part of the music is, of course, the natural world, I guess, as a muse and as an actual player in your score, if you like, of Orkney. And I mean, when did that relationship with the natural world for you begin?
Yeah, as I've said, so if you folk just walking the shore with my folks, or with my dad and my brothers and my siblings, and just, a stone's throw from the door and spotting gannets, you don't quite realise it at the time how lucky you are. You're surrounded by tumultuous elements today. And actually, that's pretty amazing, really. It can do something to you. For me, I realised that, and only really realising it lately, I would say, since starting this collection of records, is that nature's the one true reset for me. But taking that further, I think it's the sea in particular. It's the horizon. I mean, I would classify this music as alternative, where others would put it in a genre. I would call it an ecosystem. There's an ecosystem of music that gives you space to reflect. That, to some people, that type of music allows them to reflect, allows them to release, allows them to think. And for me, that music does as well, but it's actually just being in and around the natural world, the elements. It just does something to me, whether it's primal, whether it's just a reset, whether it's a disconnect from technology. I don't know, but for me, I've noticed that's the one thing that will just sort me out.
Coming on to that idea of nature being a reset, harnessing that space for other people to be in, your records have got birdsong and wave sound and those kind of field recordings. I mean, was that just like a natural inclination as part of the writing process?
It was. Look, for me, I believe in critical distance, and what I mean by that is where this romantic view that you have to be in the landscape with a studio with panoramic windows writing about the space. You have to have that type of environment to write. I don't believe that's true. For me, you have to go to the place. I take all my books, and I take my camera, and I take my digital and my analog field recorder, and I just get loads and loads of stuff. And then I take it all back to my basement studio in London. And you start to edit like a writer would edit, and you get rid of large swathes and chunks. I never bin anything, so I put them in a folder, which I call the orphanage of sounds, which eventually they'll eventually find a home one day.
You'd gone out, it was almost the seemed to go before daylight in the morning. What his errand at the shore was, I don't know. But he saw this woman sitting on a rock. And I think he must have suspected she was a seal woman. He watched her and saw her take the seal skin and put it on and swim away. So he was down the next morning again waiting, and she came ashore as usual. The seal came ashore anyhow, and then stripped off the seal skin, and there she was, a woman who, I don't know if she walked about the beach or what she did, but he managed to slip between her and the sea and get over the seal skin.
When I'm on the London Underground, or I'm rushing around the city, running to do this, that, and the other, if a field recording or a conversation or a story or a bit of local dialect can bring me home with a jolt, like the voice of the curlew will do that, then I know that field recording is absolutely right. It's the essence of my trip, my memory at that time. And so the field recordings are really vital for that, because they create a world. They create their own little world. I think this romantic view of you have to have this kind of chalet or shack overlooking a glen to actually write about that space, I think that's nonsense. I think if I had that, I'd be wholly distracted.
one thing that we've sort of touched on, this idea of journeying, that very much your records have been on. You've gone to Orkney and you've brought them back to the city. And I mean, do you think that's kind of inherent with general islanders, the idea of leaving for perspective, then coming back with a new perspective and appreciation and everything else?
Do you know, that's a lovely way of putting it. I think you and I are advantaged in that we can see things a different way. And I think it's these sea change type perspectives. If I think about more deeply about the one thing, you know, it's the nature is the one true reset for me, but the sea being the ultimate. What that's providing me is a perspective. So I think you and I are at an advantage being islanders, or at least, I mean, you're still an islander, I'm not. It's a bit like, you know, you've got a little rowing boat. It's like, what do you put on the boat quick because you've not got long? You take the essentials. You make the essential choices. I think we've got a different sense of perspective than those from the mainland, perhaps. And I think that's a really good thing. But what I really enjoy when I work on my projects is the collaboration side. So I work 80% alone and 20% with other people. I think it's really, really important. Seeing those outsiders' point of view of what I see all the time is really, really important. It changes my perspective on the island.
Do you think as well, that ratio you've set for yourself, that 20-80, do you think by having quite an overwhelming view of needing collaboration, again, that stems from being an islander to sort of stave off isolation, perhaps?
I would say part of that is, but you know, I'm ever the underdog. So for me, I also get to play back ideas to people and see their reactions. So the kind of producer in me gets to feel it a little more. So I think there's definitely companionship in creativity. But I think it's quite brave to share your work, and it really makes your decisions, like that boy getting on the boat and knowing exactly what to take and what to leave. You sharpen your senses, your ability to make decisions. You know, anyone can make a record, but for me, these records are now wrapped up in new memories of a journey I went on with these people that I took with me. And that's a lovely thing.
Ornithology, I mean, it seems to have inspired a lot of these records, if not every track. What is it about the birds for you?
Well, look, the first record, certainly every track was inspired by birds. But let me just, I'll talk you through how I made that first record. I didn't intend to release it. I didn't intend anyone to hear it but myself. And whilst I was making these layers and adding layers upon layers, I was thinking about how to name the tracks. And whilst I was on like the London Underground, and it's really hot and sweaty and increasingly claustrophobic, and I think stress is relative. You know, we all feel stress in different ways. And I was going through some stuff. I was trying to trick my brain. So I was asking my brain, I was thinking, what was the Orcadian word Dad used to say the gannet was? Oh yeah, Solan Goose. Solan Goose, cool. I'll name that one Solan Goose. And then what was the Foma? Oh yeah, Marley. And then before I know it, like a journey, a 30-minute tube ride vanished. So I had this record where all the tracks were named after birds. And then narrative started to feed into the writing as well. But the follow-up records are other things in local dialect, not just birds.
Just on that aspect of sea, air and the general elemental feel that you're sort of pursuing with the project, do you think that's, again, coming down to this islander psyche, do you think that is an affinity that every islander has, whether they like it or not?
I think it is, yeah. I think the weather dictates the terms on an island. George Mackay-Brown summed it up really well in the local paper. It wasn't a poem. He said something like, the essence of Orkney's magic are the deep, marvellous rhythms of sea and air. So light to me was the air, the birds, the sky, the sea, the land. This collection of words, which sounds like a poem, is kind of like a roadmap for me. It's all spelt out, or a nautical map of exactly what to do. The first record about the air, the second about the sea, and the third about land. But it's more than that. It's about community, myth, mythology, people. I think these are all the elements that make up an island, from the community to the earth, to the sky, to the light, to the sea that surrounds it. I think all islanders have that, no matter where that island is.
And you say for yourself that the sea is the ultimate. I mean, could you explain that a little more?
I think what the sea can do is it can be incredibly dangerous and incredibly calm within minutes, and I think that's a good metaphor for life. And when you look out at the sea, you get a sense of perspective greater than looking out perhaps at a landscape, I think. And it can, as it ebbs and flows, it can it gives thoughts and take thoughts away. So that's what the sea does for me.
I mean, the health of the environment, the impacts of this warming climate, it's finally being talked about with like this sense of urgency and severity. And I just want to know, as a musician, because you've got this affinity to the natural world, you use its elements as your muse. Do you see yourself as a bit of a conservationist at all in this?
Let me answer that in a way that I think there's a real danger to have things shoved down your throat, which causes a polarised way of thinking, which is absolutely required. But equally, I think good conservation comes from good education. And in that, I think, for example, a young child, or we would call peedybreeks in Orkney, peedybreeks being small trousers, learning about the coastline and learning about puffins and understanding that those bird numbers have reduced by 30%, but learning about them in a way that is interesting to them is much more valuable than telling a child the statistics of the doom and gloom of the environment. Absolutely, it's a state of emergency. But there's two ways to go about it, about kind of informing people of what they can do, what they can understand about the environment. But for me, the most important thing is just creating a space where people can reflect and think about their relationship with nature. I think if you can think about your relationship with nature, you'll do a better job of conserving it. And learning about nature, learning about birds, learning about the coastline is a great way to do that, in my view anyway.
Yeah, no, it's about exposing people to that tangibility of nature, isn't it? Rather than it being simply a documentary or something. It's actually being there with it.
I've gone for a walk in the countryside in England and met 4 people. Now, that says a lot to me. It may have been the time of the week or whatever, but I think people love the idea of nature. But you actually go for a walk, go outside, and you'll bump into a handful of folk depending on the time of the day. So I think people like to talk about it, but actually go and enjoy it before nature becomes a national park. I hate this feeling that one day to go and experience nature, you have to go to a national park to do that.
It takes away the idea of wilderness, doesn't it? If it's sort of compartmentalised, in boundary fences and whatever else.
It is, but it's amazing how many people talk about it, but actually you go for a wander and you'll be surprised at how many folk you actually bump into. Like whenever I see a Solan Goose fishing, I'm there. I'm back home, or I'm thinking big, you know.
You've been listening to Making Waves.
Click subscribe below so you can follow along on the journey. Thanks for listening.